I'm pretty sure I live in augmented reality. My name is Josh, I'm 38, and honestly, I think I live in augmented reality. It sounds like another conspiracy theory to begin with, but I swear I'm genuinely sure of it. It all started a few years ago, and ever since then I can't shake the feeling that something is wrong with this world. But let me explain. Until recently, I was convinced that my mom was a couple years younger than my dad. I remember it as clearly as if it was written somewhere in my head in big bold letters. I even remember saying it to friends when I was a teenager, citing it as an example of love that knows no age boundaries. But a few years ago, over dinner, I casually mentioned it in front of my mom. Her reaction took me by surprise. She grinned and calmly said, "Josh, your father and I are the same age. We were both born the same year." I almost dropped my fork. I tried to argue, to make an argument, but she remained adamant. To convince me finally, she pulled out her old papers and showed me her date of birth. The same year as my father's. It was like a blow under the breath. I couldn't accept it, because in my mind she had always been younger. And that's when I started thinking, what if I'm no longer in the reality I was born into? I started replaying the events of my life in my head, trying to find the point where everything went wrong. And I found it. 2019. This year was a strange year. First, I was in a serious car accident. The car went into a skid on a wet road, and honestly, I don't know how I stayed alive. A few months later, I went through a major depressive episode. I had a clear plan to kill myself. I even wrote a note. But then I abruptly changed my mind, as if someone had flipped a toggle switch in my head. I got out of that state, but I haven't felt the same since. The world around me has changed. Not abruptly, not all at once. It was the little things I started to notice. Friends became a little less close, as if I had distanced myself from them. Things I used to love no longer brought pleasure. Even my house. I'd lived here for years, but at some point it started to feel foreign. Like everything around it had shifted slightly, like a picture that hadn't been fully aligned. And then this incident with my mom was the last straw. I can't get rid of the thought that in 2019, I died. Maybe in that accident. Or maybe I did follow through with my plan and my memory just erased that moment. And now I live in an alternate reality, slightly different from where I was born. And you know what's weird? As I'm writing this, something happened in the bathroom. The towel that was hanging on the hook just fell to the floor. There's no wind in here. The ventilation doesn't even work. The house is completely still. And I can't help thinking that it's a sign. That someone, or something, from behind a veil I can't even begin to guess at, is trying to get my attention. I don't know where this is all going, but sometimes I feel like I'm not living my life. Or maybe it is my life, but slightly altered. Like someone opened a file and made a couple edits to it that I can't ignore. Updated. I couldn't just let it go. Something deep inside me demanded to understand why the world, which had seemed so stable and clear, suddenly began to behave as if I were watching a badly edited movie. One thought clung to another, and finally I decided to act, immersing myself in memories. The first thing I did was start going through my old photos. I had a whole box of albums in the attic that I hadn't opened in years. There were snapshots of my childhood, family holidays, even school events. I thought that if I started digging through the past, I would find something that would prove me right. Maybe I'd come across evidence that my mom really was younger than my dad. Or at least something oddly inconsistent with what I remembered. When I opened the first album, I was overcome with a strange feeling, like I was looking at pictures of someone else's face. The faces were all familiar. My mom, my dad, myself at the age of 7 with a shattered knee, even our old dogs. But there was something about them that didn't feel right. For example, I always thought we had a golden retriever named Max when I was a kid. But there was some kind of black dog in the pictures. And his name was Buster. It was written on his collar. I've been trying to find an explanation. Maybe I had gotten something mixed up. Maybe we really did have another dog before Max showed up? But the more I looked, the more the feeling grew that my entire memory was nothing more than a poorly put-together puzzle with half the pieces from a different set. An incident with friends. The next day, I decided to share my thoughts with Jason, my best friend since childhood. If anyone could help me figure it out, it was him. We met at the bar where we usually hung out after work. I hesitated for a long time, wondering how to start the conversation so he wouldn't think I'd gone completely off the rails.
"Jace," I began, "remember when you and I ran away to that rock concert in 2002?
He gave me a surprised look.
"What rock concert? We didn't run away."
"What do you mean?" I almost spit out my drink. "Are you serious? We snuck out the back door because we didn't have money for tickets. You even ripped your favorite jeans when you got caught on the fence." Jason shook his head. "Man, I'd remember that kind of thing. Are you sure that was with me?"
I fell silent, looking into his eyes, and realized that he really didn't remember anything.
Not just forgotten, it was never in his memories. It was one of the highlights of our friendship. Signals appearing. The more I tried to figure out what was going on, the more strange things started to happen. The towel in the bathroom was just the beginning. After a couple days, I noticed that certain items in the house were constantly changing their location. My laptop, which I used to leave on the kitchen table, was suddenly on the couch.
The hallway light would turn on by itself in the middle of the night.
Then one day I woke up to the sound of someone walking around my apartment. I jumped up, armed myself with a baseball bat, and slowly walked out into the living room. There was no one there. Only the clock on the wall was showing 3:47 for some reason, even though I knew it was actually about 2 in the morning. And that's when I felt it. I didn't see it, I didn't hear it, I felt it. Like someone was watching me. Out of the corner of the room, out of the darkness, something or someone was standing there looking at me. "Who's there?" I squeezed the bat so tight my knuckles turned white. Silence. Only the faint whirring of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I decided to turn on the light. But just as my fingers touched the switch, something whispered behind me. "You weren't supposed to come back." I turned around, but there was no one in the room. Just my shadow fluttering on the wall. Unknown messages. After that, I started noticing strange messages. A handprint appeared on my car window once, even though I had just washed it and knew no one had touched it. The screen on my phone would occasionally pop up short messages like, "Do you see? Do you understand?" But when I tried to show it to someone, they would immediately disappear. I began to feel that something or someone really wanted to contact me. But why? And why now? The ending. One night I had the most realistic dream of my life. I was standing on an empty road. It was dark all around. But in the distance, on the horizon, I saw a light. And a voice called out to me. It sounded familiar, like my mother's voice, but at the same time it was completely foreign. "Josh," the voice said, "you died in 2019. Everything you see now is a reflection of what could have been. But you can still choose. Go back or stay here." I didn't know what to answer. The lights were getting brighter and the voice louder. "Decide," he said, before I woke up in my bed, covered in cold sweat. I still don't know what it means. But from that moment on, my life has been like a never-ending puzzle, and I'm not sure if I want to know what's behind the last piece. Updated. After that night, I could no longer ignore what was happening. The feeling that someone or something was following me became unbearable. Each day brought a new oddity, a new element that didn't fit into the familiar world. For example, my neighbor across the hall, an elderly man named Harold, suddenly began acting as if we had never met. Although we had often exchanged greetings on the landing, he now looked at me with slight suspicion, as if he were seeing me for the first time. I tried to convince myself that it was all just a coincidence, a mind game. But the more I searched for logical explanations, the more I fell deeper into the darkness. And then the blackouts started. The first time it happened was at the supermarket. I was standing at the grocery shelf, thinking about which coffee to get, when everything around me suddenly went dark. Everything disappeared for a moment, and I felt strangely dizzy. When I came to my senses again, I was already home. There were bags of groceries on the kitchen table in front of me, but the contents were alarming. Some things I definitely hadn't bought. A jar of pickles, which I've hated since childhood. A pack of cookies I'd never eaten. I stared at these things, feeling a growing fear. How did I end up at home? How did I buy the groceries? Why these particular ones? I checked my watch. Only 20 minutes had passed since I'd left the house. But it felt different, as if a piece of time had fallen out and someone had inserted a fragment of someone else's life in its place. The next disconnection happened at work. I was sitting at my computer, editing a spreadsheet, when I fell into the void again. I woke up 3 hours later, sitting in the office kitchen. I had a glass of cold coffee in my hands, which apparently had been there for quite a while. My co-workers hadn't noticed anything strange. Only Karen, with whom I usually had little contact, looked at me with slight concern. "Are you okay, Josh?" she asked cautiously, as if she didn't want to scare me with her question. I rubbed my temples, trying to get rid of the headache that had come on right after I'd passed out. Yeah, it's fine," I mumbled, keeping my head down. "You've just been sitting here for a while, thinking. I came in here about 20 minutes ago, and you were in the same position." "Just brooding," I repeated, feeling my heart start to beat faster. Her words startled me. I had no idea what I'd been doing all this time. I didn't remember getting up from my desk, getting my coffee, or being in the kitchen. When I returned to my workstation, my spreadsheet was completely finished. All the calculations I was about to do were already in place. And the handwriting of the numbers, if you could call it that, was strange. Neat, machine-like, as if someone else had done them. I tried to forget about it, write it off as fatigue. But it kept happening. The blackouts became more frequent. Sometimes I'd wake up in the morning and realize I was already fully dressed and packed for work, though I had no memory of doing so. Sometimes I would find calls or messages on my phone that I hadn't sent, and that scared me more and more. One night I failed again, but this time I came to myself not at home or at work. I was standing in the middle of a park. There was no one around, only a faint wind stirring the leaves on the trees. I was wearing a jacket I didn't remember wearing. In my hands I was holding something. It was a piece of paper folded in half. I unfolded it, feeling my fingers trembling slightly. On the paper was written, "You're close to the truth, but you won't like what you find." There was no signature. Everything inside me flipped. I threw the sheet to the ground, but immediately regretted it. When I bent down to pick it up, the paper was gone. In its place was only a boot print. Since then, I've noticed more and more things I can't explain. A crack appeared on my bedroom closet that wasn't there before. My laptop turned on by itself one day, and a folder of files I'd never created opened on the screen. Among them was one signed with my name, but when I tried to open it, the computer just shut down. I felt like someone was watching me. This feeling did not leave me even at night. Sometimes I would wake up with the feeling that someone was in the room. But whenever I turned on the light, there was no one there. One day I decided to record on camera what was happening while I slept. The next morning I reviewed the tape. Most of the time nothing happened, but toward the middle of the night the door to my bedroom began to slowly open and close. And then I saw it. For a moment, someone's figure appeared in the frame. A dark silhouette, indistinguishable, but I knew it wasn't a dream. When I pressed pause to get a better look at it, the screen went blank, and the camera didn't turn on again. Thank you for watching this video. I would appreciate it if you put a like and subscribe to the channel, as most likely this is not the end of the story. Before meeting.